Test.
The only way you'll catch me when invincible is for the material season, not for my ministerial office. You want to start at noon, or do you want to just get going? Let's get going.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back to this is part two of a two-part series for Advent called Radical Religion. And to remind us, this came about from having some conversations with some folks here and also in the wider community about really trying to figure out what is religion in our contemporary world. How do we live religiously if we want to? What difference does it make? How does it relate to church? Big, huge topics which we can't do in just two forums, but, hopefully this will be an introduction and we'll have continued conversations moving forward. So last week I suggested that there are some helpful ways, rather than trying to define religion, to describe it. And what happens when people gather around traditions and texts and shape the way they live based on those things. Very broad definition of religion, which means you can have a religious life without even referencing God, because it has to do with how you perceive the world, how you relate to others, and shape yourselves for a particular way of life in the world. So this week I want to really focus our attention on a particular way of being religious in the world. But I want us to start, well, as you can see what it is, table fellowship as radical social practice. Those of you who know me well and those of you who are only just starting to get to know me know that I talk about this a lot. I talk about the table. And so I'd like to focus our attention on this again today. Because I really do believe it's central to this much larger question. But I want us to start a little bit more sort of, what do I want to say, folksy and homesy just for a second. And I invite you to do some reflection, which we will then share some of our memories and observations about a couple of quick questions concerning shared meals. So I want you to pause just for a moment and think back on a really wonderful time when you were sharing a meal with others. It could be a holiday meal, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. It could be a regular weeknight meal. It could be a birthday meal. It could be whatever you want to make it. Just think about a wonderful time that you shared a meal with others. What did it smell like? What did it taste like? Just reflect on these questions for a moment. Who was around the table? Why were they there? let the memory just sit there and simmer for a little bit. Would anyone like to share a little bit of these memories with us so we can get even some shared memories of a shared meal or a dinner party? And we use this, by the way, not so much for us here, but because of those who are joining us online. So this makes sure that they can hear us. Anybody? Tell us about a wonderful shared meal. Sarah?
I have a really recent one on the Camino. So it was the night before I walked into Santiago, and it was a really long table. Our hosts were a Galatian and Italian. Couldn't understand a lick of anything. There were a couple English speakers, and we had an absolute ball. We sang. I don't know how we had an absolute ball. Like, the food was amazing. It was salad and soup, but salad and soup never tasted so good. They had great wine, that probably helped.
Yes.
But it was just a wonderful, communal, shared values, I suppose, experience.
Were all of those people doing the Camino?
Yeah, everyone was doing the
Ah,
Camino.
yeah.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
it was very cool.
Anyone else? Any kind of a shared meal memory that you have that you'd like to share?
All right. I'm usually not a big sharer, but one thing that Steve and I did one winter a few years after we moved to our home where we are now is we didn't, our neighbors are a bit spread out where we are, and we didn't really see them a whole lot. And so during the winter months, we did, I think we did second Saturday soups. And just kind of said, hey, whoever's around on a Saturday will have soup and bread at our house at 5, whatever that was, 5:30 or something. Just come if you can. And it was actually kind of wonderful. I mean, not everybody made it every single time that winter, but we got to know each other in a way that was different than just kind of waving or saying hi, or if you needed to talk about plowing or
Plowing, right.
something, some other reason.
Yeah.
And it just, it was easy and
She made really good soup.
just a fun,
She always makes good soup.
Really good soup.
yeah, thing to do. So
Wonderful story. Anybody else on this side of the sanctuary? Wonderful meal. Anything about it you'd like to share? If something occurs to you as we go through this from that memory that you would like to offer to the conversation, jump in, okay? Because we know statute of limitations on that. I don't have to use this. I've got this. So I want to share just, first of all, these memories of shared meals is a form of religious practice. Not only the meal sharing itself, but the memory of it is a form of religious practice. Because then you bring that memory with you the next time you gather at a table. Even if it's with different people and a different occasion, there's this sense in which, oh, right, even if you're not explicitly, consciously aware of it, you're bringing these experiences of shared meals and tables with you. That's part of what it means to be religious. I want to share a series of images of food sharing, a short montage, and I just, you'll hopefully understand why I love these. First of all, that's a classic, right? This is Norman Rockwell's painting Freedom from Want. This is a wonderful medieval manuscript illustration. And part of what I love about this food table and all these people sharing a meal and so on is the dog at the bottom here near the table. So what's really great about this is There are lots of paintings and illustrations of Eucharist with dogs in it, which is not surprising because, especially in the Middle East, you often did not have closed doors. There were open eating spaces, so there would be dogs usually at a shared meal. That's really interesting to me, too. This image by Alina Evstig, Food We Shared. I love this. This is an Ethiopian image. It's called Gersha. One gives Gersha to another. It's a communal act of placing a morsel of food in someone's mouth, a favor that's immediately returned. The word Gersha means mouthful. So it's literally sharing food with somebody. This is a photograph. I believe it's like late 19th, early 20th century, something like that, of a Chinese table gathering. I don't know what part of China. Lady and the Tramp, Walt Disney Company. This, of course, is a slightly stylized reproduction of the famous Leonardo da Vinci painting of the Last Supper. How about this version? So this photo is based on it, but it was shot as part of the United Church of Canada's 100th anniversary, and the purpose of it was to show that everybody is welcome at the table. But they tried to evoke the Da Vinci painting, right? Or how about this? I love this. This is also meant to evoke the Da Vinci painting, but it's based on the Gospel of Mark verse about Jesus saying, "Let the children come to me." Well, this is what happens when you let the children.
That'll be you.
That's me on Christmas Eve. This is why I get so nervous. That might be the last one. Is that the last one? Yes. So that's just a small sampling, of course, of the really wide diversity of table fellowship in the world and different cultures and different ways of thinking about sharing meals. The reason that I find that so compelling, because it's a reminder of how central sharing food is for us as human beings in all sorts of formal and informal ways. Gathering around a table together is hugely significant for humans. And that's why I think this is a really important way to think about Christian faith. Christian faith began not with a text or a doctrine or an institution, but with a radical social practice. Table fellowship. I know many of you have heard me talk about this before. It's worth, as I said earlier, repeating why this is so central. It's actually kind of hard for many modern Western folks to grasp this, but sharing food and having sex are the two most regulated activities among human beings in every society. Those two things are also the primary means by which every society creates hierarchies of social order and power. And wherever you see religion explicitly on display, not far away will be food and sex. And part of the reason for this makes some sense if you think about it. Our survival as a species depends on food and sex. So these powerful activities, of course, are going to be the most regulated among human communities, and also where you're going to find gods and goddesses nearby, right? This is still a bit difficult for many in the U.S. to grasp because we tend not to have the same kind of formal patterns and customs around food sharing, except unless it's a holiday meal. Then there are things like, what are you doing? You can't put that on the table. This is Christmas. Right? There are all these things that get associated with holiday meals. But generally speaking, modern Western society is very relaxed about meal sharing, so we don't quite grasp the significance of who shares food with us. Similarly, over the last 150 years, the so-called relaxation of sexual ethics and standards also makes it difficult for us to understand sometimes why sex could be so important around religion and society. However, that said, the crisis of hunger in the world today can help us realize the importance of food in a different way, and in this country too. In the richest country the world has ever known, there are hungry people here. Similarly, the ongoing heartbreak of the Jeffrey Epstein saga illustrates how power gets attached to sex. So part of what I'm trying to get at is, when I say this, a radical social practice, table fellowship, part of what the gospel writers preserve for us is a truly revolutionary approach to meal sharing that we as modern Western people are likely to miss. Even though the gospel writers try to point it out to us all these centuries later, Jesus was constantly getting into trouble for eating with the wrong people. Constantly. The way you share food with others is how you maintain social hierarchies of value. And especially for first century Mediterranean societies, that hierarchy, social hierarchy of value, isn't just, it wasn't treated as though it were just made up. It reflects the natural hierarchy of the world. It reflects the religious hierarchy of the world. It says something about who God is and who we are in relation to God. And Jesus scrambles all the rules. All the rules. And so people, especially those who are usually excluded from certain types of meal sharing, they find themselves at table with him and others where they shouldn't be. Suddenly there's this like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Maybe God is not on the side of strict hierarchies of value. Maybe God is on the side of everybody's welcome to the table. And not long after these gospel texts are written and the stories that they are remembering, early Christian communities start to make meal sharing their primary act of worship, to remember those moments of scrambled rules. Just like you all I was inviting you to remember shared meals, and that the memory of it is itself a religious act to remember those wonderful wonderful meals. That's what's happening in the very first century of Christian traditions. These early Christians are remembering the practice that Jesus had of meal sharing, and they're making it their occasion to pray and give thanks to God for new life. That's a religious moment. And just to underscore, I don't want to belabor this point too much, and we'll have some conversation here in just a moment. Just as reminder, I'm not making this up. This is a New Testament scholar. One distinctive feature of Jesus' ministry was his practice of a radically inclusive and non-hierarchical table fellowship. In that society, it was exclusive and hierarchical. For Jesus, it was inclusive and non-hierarchical. And this was a central strategy in his announcement and redefinition of the in-breaking reign of God. The reign of God, the kingdom of God is here. How do you know it? Because you get to eat at this table. And this is I won't go at this at length, but I just want to get a flavor of the boundaries that were established in the first century at the time for who can eat with whom. First of all, you usually eat with your extended family, and that can be quite a few people. You know, that's an appropriate way to share food. But then you also are going to be sharing food with those in your own social class. You don't mix classes at the table. There are also other hierarchical strata in terms of gender, in terms of other economic class, in terms of religious purity, too. And so religious affiliation. When you realize all of these boundaries that were placed around proper table fellowship, some of the gospel passages that might be really familiar to us take on a new kind of life. So Jesus is challenges the norms of table fellowship in John by washing the feet of his disciples. He, at the table, is becoming a servant rather than a leader. James and John, in the context of table fellowship, requested the best seats of honor, and Jesus said, "You don't get this. Let me tell you what this is really about. Whoever wishes to become great must be the servant." And there are all sorts of them. Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners. That's a no-go. Jesus did not wash his hands before a meal. We think, and rightly so, that that's to help prevent the spread of disease. Washing hands before a meal in that context was to indicate that you are religiously pure. So Jesus refuses to wash his hands because it doesn't matter. Well, and we could go on and on about that. I want to have some conversation here in just a minute. Given all of that, how then do we read? Do you remember I said last week religion can be, one of the words that we get the word religion from is a Latin verb that means to reread, to pass on certain traditions and texts and stories and especially memories. At the Eucharistic table, what we do every week around the table is an act of memory and hope together. We remember the last meal and all the other meals Jesus shared and his suffering and death, and we hope for new life, for Easter life, for a different kind of community. We do that constantly every week around the table. So the passing on of this tradition is part of what makes it religious. We pass it on amongst ourselves and to others. Now here's something, and I just want to pause and say a little bit more, or just something briefly about our practice here at All Saints. I've said this in at other occasions, and I just want to keep underscoring it. Because it is a departure from how some parishes do Eucharist, and B, because I want you all to know why we do it in a certain way. There are reasons. So, imagine, first of all, the 4th century is this gigantic watershed moment in the history of Christianity when Constantine embraces Christianity as something like the official religion of the empire. At almost immediately, Christians come up from their catacombs where they had been hiding, and they stroll right into basilicas for worship. Basilicas were places of public gatherings for public officials and those in power to adjudicate disputes, for example, to conduct business, to put on display the power of empire. So these public gathering places now become places for Christians to gather for worship. I'm letting that sit there as a significant pause, because the way this sanctuary is designed reflects that moment where you ordinary citizens of the empire sit, and where the powerful public official is way up here behind a fence, right? And where you can come and make your case and plead your reasons for whatever it is you need, or pay your taxes. So, not without being too cheeky about this, imagine a space alien comes and hears these wonderful stories about Jesus sharing food with everybody and breaking all the rules for table fellowship. And then this same space alien sees a 5th century Roman basilica with a table behind a fence. Is there any reason at all the space alien thinks the basilica has anything to do with the stories? You'd have to make a pretty strong argument that this reflects the socially revolutionary posture of Jesus around table fellowship. This is why, first of all, it's really hard to undo centuries and centuries of religious architecture. And one of the challenges is one of my great mentors, liturgy mentors, Lewis Weil is his name in seminary, and became a very dear friend. He had like dozens of great keeper lines, little aphoristic lines to remember. One of them was, the space always wins. The space always wins. I can stand up here and speak until I'm blue in the face and say, radical social practice. Jesus invited everyone to the table. Everybody is welcome. But the space, the space gives a different message. I am not arguing that we tear down this sanctuary. I'm not arguing anything that will make people pass out and have little aneurysm. What I am suggesting, however, is even though the space always wins, there are ways to do things in the space that help to underscore the message. That's why, and I know it's hard for lots of people who were expecting us to return to this practice after COVID, but this is why I come down from up there and stand here to distribute communion. First of all, it breaks the fence that's around the table. But second of all, it's a great visual for what I think is at the heart of the gospel. God comes to us. The wonderful parable, there's just tons of ways you could illustrate this, but the wonderful parable of the prodigal son. The son who says, I'm going to go back, I'm going to say I'm sorry to dad and see if I can't, before the son can do any of that, it makes me weep every time the father is running down the road to greet him. And Jesus says, that's God. That's what God is like. Come to the table, everybody. So that's part of why I really am committed and convinced that the visual of coming down from the table, down the road, is an image of God coming to everybody with new life. Here's where I'll end, and then invite conversation. And it's this. And I know I'm going to regret trying to do this quickly because there's a lot to say about this. One of the challenges in religion is reading and rereading texts that are not journalistic articles from a newspaper. They aren't biographies. They aren't history books. They are theology texts. So they're inviting us to think theologically, to live spiritually, to pray in certain ways. And part of what this means is learning to read differently these ancient texts for our religious lives. Some of you have heard me say this before. I think actually the Masons may have even heard Marcus Borg say this in person, but there's a wonderful illustration of this. And I want to say, again, way too briefly, but I want to just mention the story in John's account of the gospel about the wedding at Cana, when Jesus turns water into wine. Very familiar story, right? One of the things Marcus Borg, a New Testament scholar, famously said, and it's part of the wonderful legacy of his work, he read that story. I heard him say this. He read the story of Jesus turning water into wine from John's account of the gospel in front of a group in church. And he finished the story and he said, "That did not happen. Now, let me tell you why it's true." So the point is to read these stories that invite the heart of the gospel, not as a journalistic account, but an invitation for us, how we think and how we live, to be true to who God is, the way that Jesus presented who God is. And the reason I love the wedding at Cana story, and I know this is you're going to think I'm just totally nuts because I can't do this justice, but John's account of the gospel is basically the Christian interpretation of Genesis by using the Song of Songs. That makes it a deeply erotic gospel, which is about God's love affair with us. God coming to us in all sorts of ways. And by the way, you can see this in the significance of gardens in John's account of the gospel, and the Song of Songs in the Hebrew Bible features an amorous couple meeting in a garden. It's fascinating. We'll have another forum sometime where we only talk about that. But here's my point. When you get to the wedding at Cana, and I'll say something about that image in just a second. We modern Western people are so fixated with journalistic and historical accounts. We think that second chapter in John's account of the gospel is a story about Jesus turning water into wine. Yes, it is. But really, like for several centuries, the way Christian communities read it is as a parable. Not a parable that Jesus told, but a parable about Jesus. And as weird as this is going to sound, this may be the weirdest thing you've heard me say, although that's a long list. As weird as this will sound, there's the nameless couple. John doesn't say who's getting married in Cana. What early Christian readers embraced was the idea that Jesus was marrying his disciples. That's what the wedding in Cana is about. Not because it was a big gay community, but because They understood the good news of the gospel to be God's passionate love for us and desire to be deeply in communion with God's own creation. God's passionate desire for us, which can only be expressed in that kind of language you find at a wedding. And the reason I love this is because this is a medieval manuscript illustration, illumination it's called, of the wedding at Cana. However, this is Jesus as the groom at the wedding banquet. This is John, the beloved disciple in the garlands of a bride. So, again, modern Western people are like, that's just nuts. What is going on? It is an illustration of what the story at the wedding in Cana is supposed to illustrate for us. God's passionate desire to be in communion with us. I wanted to share that because for multiple reasons, but to help us when we think about religion, to break free from the way it so often gets presented in terms of rules and regulations and strict ways of behaving. Sure, that's part of religious traditions, but really what religious texts and traditions like this are meant to invite is insights about who we are, who God is, and how we should live. And that's what we try to reproduce around that table every Sunday, which I think, and here's where I'll shut up, I think that holds promise for healing for a really divided, violent world. To have a community constantly being shaped and formed by this kind of radical hospitality. A radical hospitality that, first of all, comes from God and then shapes us to be radically hospitable in turn. And in a world that with so many divisions, such deep fragmentation, hostility, and violence, it takes ongoing practice to be a community that is hospitable and healing and without divisions. That's why we come every week. See how religious you are? Okay, that was a romp through table fellowship, how it gave rise to Christian faith, and how it gets practiced, at least in part, today. And I'm wondering what you think and what your questions or comments are about that in terms of religion. Remembering radical religion, getting down into the roots of where this all came from. Mary.
I remember many times, but in fact, just like a year ago, to be in a Catholic church and basically being told that if you were not Catholic, you were not welcome to receive communion. Now, the last one I was at, he even made it more specific. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just if you weren't Catholic, but if you had gone to church every week. I mean, he had a list of requirements for you, even as a Catholic, to go to communion. And, sometimes when I do that, I still go.
Mary. So, thank you. Yes, I don't want to diss Catholics. However, because I actually, my own formation and training as a priest is in the Anglo-Catholic tradition of the Anglican world, so I have a deep respect for Catholic tradition. But I will just say I find that to be a horrible distortion of the gospel. to put those requirements out there, and I know David Mason has unhappy memories about that, at teaching at a Jesuit school too. And am I still online? I'm going to, Steve, because I'll probably get in trouble. So, okay, who cares? Here we go. So, according to the canons of the Episcopal Church, what I say on Sunday mornings is actually technically incorrect. Because I invite people to have communion regardless of who you are, what religion you are, even whether you've been baptized. And according to the canons of the Episcopal Church, you're supposed to be a baptized Christian before you receive communion.
Canon police
Are at the door. Here, put on the handcuffs, baby. However, and believe me, and the wardens know, the vestry knows, sometimes to their chagrin, that I really do care about the canons and the rubrics of the Episcopal Church a lot. And I need really good reasons not to follow them. This is a good reason, in my view, not to follow it. And so here's my short reason why. Eucharist is not a reward for good behavior. Eucharist is God coming to meet us with new life, with love, with grace, with healing, and to shape us as a Eucharistic people for a world that needs it. Almost every time the Episcopal Church gathers for General Convention, which is every 3 years, for the last at least 30 years or more, there has been a resolution presented to relax that canon. To say, no, we want to practice what's called an open table. For all the reasons I've just listed, the resolution fails every time.
But many Episcopal churches do what you do.
And I'll probably jump into that fray the next time the General Convention meets and submit a paper to the House of Bishops or to someone.
Does it count?
No. Spider. Norm, I'm sorry, I'm doing so much talking and I invited you all to talk.
Just my experience here at All Saints has, it's been effective without you being explicitly teaching about all the things you're saying, and especially the welcome
I'm
and
relieved.
To people, wherever they are, that they were welcome at the table. And if you say something over and over again, you almost could think that it gets kind of boring or kind of tedium or just kind of a routine thing that you got to do. But I've always felt that you enjoyed repeating yourself on this, and I'm glad for that. but also, again, you've talked a lot about table fellowship over the years, the couple of years, and I've just come to without teaching, not looking at the rails or the fence, just that you are serving us from the table, and so you've been effective. This message has gotten through in a good way.
I'm really grateful for that, Norm. Thank you for saying so. And when we had, for 2 minutes, a bishop provisional in this diocese, Prince Singh, whom I still miss. It's complicated. But I tried to be wow, isn't that sunshine beautiful through those windows? I tried to be a good team player and follow the rules, right? And one of the things you do in a situation like this is to let your bishop know, I'm breaking the canons, and here's why. I'm letting you know. So I told Prince, I said, he was relatively new here, and I said, I just want you to know what I do. Here's why. And he said, Jay, I'm totally fine with that. He said, you're doing great Eucharistic formation. He said, I would encourage you to think also about robust baptismal formation. And I loved that response because there is a really important way of thinking about our baptismal covenant in the Book of Common Prayer that has these amazing vows and promises that we make about how we're going to live because of our commitment to the gospel, including respecting the dignity of every living being and treating everybody with respect and working for peace with justice, et cetera, et cetera. So Prince was right. He said, it's not that baptism doesn't matter, but once people taste the welcome, then they're going to want to sign up, right? They're like, oh, this community is about grace and love and healing and welcome. Yes, sign me up. And it's like, okay, let's get baptized. Let's do the covenant. Do you see? It's switched. And I think that's how Jesus did it, frankly. Jane.
Okay, two things I'd like to say. We were talking about a meal that we shared. And this past September, we shared a meal, and we honored two of our longest members, the Fullen-Whiters,
Yes.
John and Cindy.
Yes.
There was a little hesitation for this, but I mentioned to Jay, how much longer are we going to have this couple with us? They're in their late 90s. Second point, with so many churches around the country and probably around the world closing every week,
Yes.
I think I heard the number 12,000 a year.
It's 50 a week.
Well, let's someone do the math.
I don't know what
I
the
was
number
a
is.
history teacher.
It's 50 times 50. What's 50 times 50? 2,500? Thank you.
Oh, okay, we have a math person.
2,600 if we do 52 weeks. Yeah, every year.
Okay, thank you.
Calculus pays off.
I taught history. Okay, second point. We want to welcome people. I'm looking around here, and as far as I know, we only have, two cradle Episcopalians?
Aaron.
Oh, okay. Maybe
Aaron,
4.
Francis, David, Margie.
Okay. Okay. Well,
But not much.
okay,
Yeah.
Well,
But not many, Jane. It's
not
true.
many. We want to welcome people. Don't put up fences. Open the gates. Welcome people. I'm surprised at the Catholic Church that didn't they relax things? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. But, maybe it's time. Maybe with a new pope, let's welcome people. Make them comfortable.
And I want, absolutely, Jane, and I would say this is what made Jesus such a provocative figure that the gospel writers were trying to write about. Precisely because once you're welcomed to the table and you have this inkling that that's what God is like, it changes your view of yourself, of the world around you, all of it. And the other part of it is, which I don't talk as much about, hopefully it does seep in, thank you, Norm, for that, but is what we do here and the pattern that we have here is meant to inform all the other tables around which we gather outside of this place, so that we set hospitable tables in our homes, or we invite an welcoming space in other places where there are shared tables. In other words, this isn't supposed to be isolated from the rest of our lives. This is supposed to help us figure out how we set that table in the world. And you know, I was a little nervous this morning. Sometimes hopefully it doesn't show, or sometimes it's good if it shows, I suppose. But I was taking a few risks this morning, quoting John Lennon's song, Imagine, because, you know, a world without borders? In a world where borders are being fortified? A world without possessions? A world without religious divisions?
A world where a king tries to be friends with
A foreign empire? There's, you know, what's really great is I can say, I'm not making this up, it's in the Bible. But again, and I know we're probably way over time, aren't we?
Like 50 minutes now.
We'll wrap this up. I hope that this has at least sparked some ideas that we can have some continued conversation around concerning religion. Religion, in the sense of table fellowship, is meant to be a source of our own transformation for the sake of taking that transformation into the world. And we come back every week because we have to be shaped again and again and again in that transformation as we take it out. Janet. Oh.
I attended the.
It's on.
Okay, I attended the Indivisible panel with Christian nationalism, and one of my takeaways from that was the using religion as a laundering.
Yes.
You know, people hiding behind religion to justify some of their
That's right.
closing doors and, you know, creating barriers and walls and everything else. And I am just sitting here kind of struck with the idea of table and opening doors and just what the contrast is and how welcoming it is.
Thank you so much for that, Janet. It is striking, the contrast between really what I've just presented about the gospel and about Eucharistic religion and what's being called Christian nationalism today. The contrast could not be more striking, really. I'll leave you with this, why this matters so much. I'm glad you brought it up, Janet. I'm haunted by something I read a few years ago about empires. And as we know, the Roman Empire collapsed and ended in sometime in the 500s and something like that, 6th century. What's haunting me is a line from a scholar who said, you know, the Roman Empire never ended, it became the church. And it really shook me, actually. Precisely because the architecture, you know that Eucharistic vestments that I wear on Sunday mornings are based on the garments that the Roman Senate wore, for example. People in power, the stoles, all of that stuff. So I say that as a cautionary note about why it matters that we practice this in a way that is welcoming and healing so that we don't fall back into what can be really easy, which is about power and control and those things. You all have been very patient. Thank you for your engagement with this. And I hope we can continue to find ways to have conversations about this, and with me talking less and you talking more. So, and thank you for joining us online. And you just turned that off, Steve. That's okay. Thank you.
I didn't turn it off. It's there.
Okay.